Sing us that star-spangled banner yet wave, for the land of the free and the home of the
Thank you. This is a beautiful piece of ground.
I want to talk to you today about Memorial Day, a challenge to the living. Four-star General Colin Powell appeared at a large conference in England where the Archbishop of Canterbury questioned whether our involvement in Iraq was just another example of America's empire building. General Powell's answer was poignant. Over the years, the United States has sent many of its fine young men and women into great peril to fight for freedom beyond our borders. The only amount of land we ever asked for in return is enough to bury those who did not return. The room was very silent. Memorial Day is a time to recognize the heroic deeds of the men and women in uniform who have served America. But its greater challenge is to call us to carry on the fight for the freedom they died for which so many have been left on General Powell's little piece of ground on foreign soils. South Dakotans have stood proud in defense of freedom, like Torpedo Squadron 8, commanded by Fort Pierre Native Lieutenant Commander John Walden. At the Battle of Midway, the 15 torpedo planes of Squadron 8 left the USS Hornet. As they approached the Japanese carriers, they realized that cloud cover and confusion due to radio silence had left them without fighter cover. As they were swarmed by Zeros, each man had to know in his heart that in moments he would face certain death. But not one soldier wavered, not one pilot flinched. Each man did his duty that day, and all but one of the pilots of Torpedo Squadron 8 perished in the Battle of Midway. One of Northeast South Dakota's most famous veterans can be read about in libraries across America. Duke Edmonds served with the AVG's 3rd Squadron, known as the Hells Angels. The book, entitled With General Chennault, The Story of the Flying Tigers, tells of his heroism, including one air battle in which he personally shot down at least 5 Japanese planes. On page 36 of that book, you can find a reference to my hometown. Bob Duke Edmond was going to work on his first formation. He was a quiet, rose-cheeked farm boy from Webster, South Dakota. He learned to shoot, potting jackrabbits and crows on the Dakota prairies. When the first alert sounded, quiet, conservative Duke stole an airplane to get into the fight and was the last AVG pilot to leave it. In the interval, he shot down 5 Japanese planes to share honors with R.T. Smith as the first American pilot in history to become an ace in a single battle. The South Dakota National Guard has carried on this legacy and tradition since before statehood, dating back to 1862. Our citizen soldiers in the South Dakota National Guard have served in every major conflict since the Civil War. 7,600 soldiers and airmen of the South Dakota National Guard have been deployed overseas in support of military operations. The service of these citizen soldiers comes at great personal sacrifice
And sometimes came with the ultimate sacrifice. The youngest of these soldiers to die was not old enough yet to legally buy a beer. Recognized and not so recognized, South Dakotans served their country proudly in times of war. More than that, a good number of those South Dakotans gave their lives on foreign soils.
In World War I, we lost 1,046 South Dakotans. In World War II, another 1,388 were lost, and in Korea, 243. In Vietnam, we lost 187 friends, relatives, and neighbors. 36 more of our South Dakota family gave their lives in battles in Iraq and Afghanistan. Imagine what it must have felt like for each one of those young soldiers as they sat in some trench, in a jungle, in a tank, on a troop ship, or in a bomber flying into the dark in some foreign land thousands of miles away from their loved ones in a place they called home here in South Dakota. Memorial Day is to commemorate our veterans who are no longer with us. I do not take that obligation lightly. But Memorial Day must also be a time for our appreciation for why our soldiers served and died.
The Memorial Day message I hope to impress upon you here today is that Memorial Day is a challenge to the living. A time to remember the rights and obligations we possess as a result of the sacrifices made by so many of our veterans, living and dead. They fought for principles like freedom of worship, freedom of the press, human dignity, the right to life and liberty. It'd be a sad commentary on the value of the lives of our war dead if we paid mere lip service to the principles of freedom for which they fought and died. There are forces today that push back hard against freedom.
Freedom of speech is tolerated in the public square only if it is politically correct to some cultural authoritarian eyes. Freedom of religion is pushed to the back recesses of society and silenced. You, and I do mean you, not your neighbor, not some other stranger, you have work to do to protect freedom in America. I'm reading a powerful book entitled The Naked Public Square, and it makes the point that if you allow your values and voices to be removed from the public square, you are surrendering the ground to other values and other voices. Don't do it. Honor freedom by speaking loud and proud in its defense. The world isn't any better if we don't do something about ensuring and protecting those freedoms.
Remember that every right has its concomitant duty. We must remember that if you want freedom, you have to give citizenship. It means each of us has an obligation to register, to vote, and take an interest in the operation of our government. Several years ago, I had an opportunity to meet Francis Sampson. He was a remarkable fellow. He jumped with the 101st Airborne at Normandy on D-Day. He jumped into Holland, and during the Battle of the Bulge at Bastogne, he was captured and spent 6 months in a German prisoner of war camp. He was actually captured twice, but he escaped the first time. He finished out the war in a concentration camp. When the Korean conflict broke out, he again served with paratroopers and participated in combat jumps into Korea. I'm sure that there are veterans here today that have displayed personal bravery under fire.
Rival the courage and commitment of Francis Sampson. The unique part of the Francis Sampson story may be that he rose to the rank of Major General, wearing 2 stars on his shoulders at his retirement. But I think more amazing about Francis Sampson is that this combat veteran paratrooper carried only a Bible and a crucifix into battle. He was a chaplain. He served out the later days of his life here in eastern South Dakota, where he was known as Monsignor Sampson. Some of you may have come to know retired Major General Monsignor Sampson from the speech he gave years ago during Governor Janko's Veterans Appreciation Day at the State Fair. He passed away in March of 1996. Let me share with you his words.
Monsignor Francis Sampson's reflections on the meaning of war. There are many things about war that we are anxious to forget. We want to forget the necessary sordidness and cruelties of battle, to forget the mud and the muck and the mire, the painful days and the endless nights. We want to forget the sickening sensation of fear that comes from all soldiers. War cuts down men in their prime of life. War is pain and rain and snow and cold. It is hunger and thirst and exhaustion, loneliness, separation from loved ones, and heartbreak. War should not be glorified. To attempt to do so would be the ultimate sacrilege. But this world is not always a flower garden. Not now, never has been, nor ever will be. It is a battlefield between the forces of freedom and those of slavery, between justice and injustice, and if you will, the forces of God and love against those of evil and hatred. Sherman was not quite right when he said, "War is hell. For in hell there is no compassion, no love, no generosity, no empathy for the suffering." I believe most firmly that the American servicemen and servicewomen in combat today exemplifies more than any segment of our society the virtues of love, of self-sacrifice, of courage, and of fortitude in the face of danger and death. The men of the 101st Airborne Division did not philosophize deeply about the causes of war, but they did know that they were fighting for a way of life they loved, and that freedom is the inherent right of all. They fought without hatred, suffered without complaint, endured without despair. When I first joined the Screaming Eagles, I found a unit of immature boys, carefree and full of mischief. But they grew in a few short years into mature soldiers who supported each other and their units with great heroism. Their trials, sacrifices, and sufferings have given them a bond of fellowship that will never be broken and a spiritual depth beyond description. I am proud to serve with them. Our beloved country is far richer for the quality of the citizenship of these veterans. Monsignor Major General Francis Sampson. Let me close with these words from President Ronald Reagan. God had a divine purpose in placing this land between two great oceans to be found by those who had a special love of freedom and courage. God bless you. God bless those who have served our country. And God bless America. Thank you.